Oh, the humanity. Yeah. It's pretty well attended. We had similar to what we had for sign up for this one. I think there was like maybe 11 or something per person. I just had the random people over there. But it was, yeah, it was quite noisy with the so after the door that closes, what's it mean? We did the gallery submission notes here, and that was it was nice. Once you close this door, it gets people to focus in instead of having the option to review. We're gonna do that final workshop one here.
Can everybody hear me there in the internet worlds? All right. Okay. Hello. My name is Stephen Ford. I'm the manager of engagement, the Allied Arts Council of Lethbridge. Of course, I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to recognize that we live and play on the lands of the traditional lands of the Blackfoot people, Treaty Number 7. Pay respect to the land and stewards of the land. And I have a thing when it comes to land acknowledgements. I believe it's words, and that's not. If we want to talk about tangible reconciliation, we need to go beyond just words, because words less action still means zero. So on that note, we talk about the relationship to the land and respecting that. One thing, obviously, that's been going on, there has been a petition going around in regards to mining on the eastern slopes. That just went in, so a big thank you to the folks at the Old Man Watershed Council and Chris Spearman and all those folks that spearheaded that. But I don't think that that's probably enough, because realistically, there's still more work to be done on that. So keep just because this petition is done doesn't mean the work is done. So please consider reaching out to not just our provincial MLAs, but also like our federal MPs, and keep the pressure on and keep this being an issue, because we know it's probably not going away and it's too important to ignore. So that's all I'll say on that for right now. What is this? This is one of our professional development sessions that we run through the Allied Arts Council. These are just generally workshops that we conduct every month, trying to give artists the tools to basically succeed in the world of arts and the business side of things and all that, just making yourself a little bit better artist than you were the day before. So that's what this workshop is all about. And of course, it is tax season. Hooray! Yay, taxes! So unfortunately, that's something that we all have to consider, and I think it's kind of maybe it's kind of a gray area and getting to know what that means as an artist, what to actually do your taxes for your arts, because of course you should be getting paid for doing art, and that's very important. But you know, government wants their cut too, so we have to make sure that we're above board on that side of things as well. So that's what this workshop is sort of about, looking at doing your taxes, but from an artist perspective. So some things maybe to consider. We have the wonderful Steph Hogan that's going to come up and do a presentation for us, just alluding to that. And then I do have the takeaway sheet from last year. We did a similar presentation around this last year, so I'll be emailing out a sort of a little worksheet that you can fill out, and maybe that helps you kind of get on your way to doing your taxes properly. Not just doing them, but doing them properly for all things art. So that's all I've got to say for right about now. So everyone snap your fingers or do whatever, just you know, pet your dog for Steph Hogan, everyone.
Thank you, Steve. So I've known Steve since about 2009 when Steve opened the Owl. I took fashion design and marketing as my first career at the college. So been in Lethbridge a long time, been part in the art scene, realized I didn't really want to do that for the rest of my career. What I really like to do is make patterns, create a sewing sequence, and do all of the things that are associated with the background of it. And I wanted to make money and live and support myself. And so I decided I'm going to take a business class at the college and see how that worked, and fell in love with accounting, and we've been here ever since. So familiar with the art scene a little bit. I don't call myself an expert by any means, but this is where I feel like I can give back to the community that I love and I'm involved with. I'm also the treasurer of the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. We are looking for board members right now, so if anyone out in the world is interested, you can definitely contact me or contact Sue Ying at the SAG. So yeah, we did a similar presentation to this last year. I work at MMP, I'm a manager at MMP. I do a lot of personal taxes throughout the season. It feels like a season that lasts for many years, every year. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So let's get into it. We're doing the art of taxes of art. The objectives that I want to have you guys take away from this would be to provide some information and resources, and some personal tax requirements that affect us all, sadly. To provide some relatable examples. So throughout the course, we're going to have some real-life examples that we'll walk through just to create a better understanding, and then to set you up for success as you're filing your taxes this year. So the agenda this evening will be to talk about the types of income. We'll go into employment income first. We'll do self-employed income, some important dates and deadlines, and then whether or not you should be a GST registrant. Okay, next we're going to talk about the types of employment, or types of income, I should say. So if you are an employed artist, you're going to have your hourly or salary. I've only had 2 sips of my beer. Some other types of income that you can have is whether or not you went on a trip or you won an award. Those are parts of taxable income that CRA does want you to report on. if you received any grant or subsidy income from the government of Alberta or government agencies around. That's also if you have any bartered transactions. An example would be if you traded a painting for like a tattoo. We'd want to report that at the fair market value. Whether or not that gets picked up very often, probably not. But just so you are aware, that would be a type of income as well. Some other income would include revenues from artwork, sales, performances, commission, royalties, or any teaching sessions that you complete. The last thing I wanted to touch on is whether or not you're completing a hobby or whether or not this is your profession. So CRA designates a hobby as a non-taxable item. So with doing your art and having involvement in that, if the intention is to not earn a profit, it is not considered income. So there's some gray area with that. If you have any questions on that, just be mindful of what is the intent of producing your art. Is your intent to sell it for a profit, or is your intent just to put it out into the world? Sometimes it just needs to be put out and then it's done, right? All right, so employment income versus self-employed. Some considerations that we want to take a look here at is whether or not you're contributing to CPP or EI. If you're an employee, you're going to want to have those contributions. Perfect. Welcome. We're just getting into it. No, you're good. I don't mean to call you out. The next thing we want to consider is whether or not you're just a subcontractor or if you're just an employee. So these are also things to consider if you are, there's a couple things to consider whether or not you would be classified as a subcontractor. I feel like often in the art world, you technically would be an employee in some situations, but there are some key points to classify whether or not you're self-employed contractor or whether or not you're an employee. So some things to consider is whether or not you have control over your hours, whether or not you have control over the tasks that you can perform, or if you are providing all of your own tools, who is taking on the risk of performing the activities of the role, who has the financial risk, what are the opportunities for profit? So are you saying, this is your contract, you're going to earn a certain amount, or it depends on how much is sold at the end of the day. Do you have control of who works with you? Can you bring on an assistant? Those kinds of things. And then lastly, what is the responsibility for investment of your own dollars or your own time? Okay. Next, we're going to take a look specifically if you are an employee. So there are some tax slips that you should be aware of. So again, most people, if they have a part-time job, if they've worked throughout their youth, they would have received a T4. This is prepared and provided by the employee. Included on this, you'll have any contributions to CPP, contributions to EI, and some income taxes payable as well. We want to also take a look if you are responsible for paying some of your own expenses, that you get assigned declaration conditions of employment. So that's called a 2200. And in some situations, if you're working from home a lot, or if you're responsible for bringing in your own tools or some of your own pieces of medium that you have to supply, that's something that your employer should be providing. So they're saying, you are responsible for working from home for this period. We're not going to reimburse you. We want to have this as allowable tax deduction, and that's what's informed on that form. So from there, when you're doing your tax return, once you get the conditions of employment, that's going to move on, and we're going to record that on a T777, and that's a statement of employment expenses. So that'll be prepared on your tax return. Also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, this is your time. You're entitled to it. If you have a burning question, feel free to ask.
And we'll save those questions actually for the end. So if you have any questions, put them into the chat if you're online, and folks in the room will do that
Okay.
at the end.
Sorry. Write them down in your brain, and we'll go through them again. So now we want to specifically look at whether you're an employed artist and you receive that T4, what are some of the expenses that you can deduct? So there are specific credits that you can look for, and also some expenses that you can deduct. So these are incurred in order to earn your employment income. They can be whether or not the criteria is if you composed a dramatic, musical, or literary work, if you performed as an actor, dancer, singer, or musician in a dramatic or musical work, if you performed at a artistic activity as a member or a professional artist in association that the Minister of the Canadian Heritage has certified, or if you created a painting, print, etching, drawing, sculpture, or a similar work of art for income tax purposes, and it is not an artistic activity when it's reproduced. So this is coming directly from CRA. So these are the criteria for you to be an artist employed. So to claim some of the expenses, they have to be within certain criteria as well. So you can claim the amount that's limited to the lesser of the expenses that you paid in 2024, plus any amounts that you carried forward from the prior year, or the lesser of $1,000 or 20% of your employment income from artistic activities, minus the amounts following the amount that you deducted from your income from your artistic activity. This includes any musical instrument expenses, interest from your motor vehicle, capital cost allowance from your motor vehicle. Any expenses can also be carried forward for future years. So it's good to capture it now, even if you can't claim it. We recommend putting it on your tax return right away. If you can't use it against any deductible income this year, it can be carried forward to the following year. Some examples of expenses that you can deduct are maintenance costs. So if you're a musician, you need regular tune-ups, that's something that's a deductible expense. Any rental fees for any musical instruments, any insurance costs, and you can also capitalize your piece of equipment and realize the expense and cost of your equipment over the years of its useful life. So now we're going to go through an example. So this is our artist expense examples. So we have Marielle. She's a violin player. She works for the local theater company. She's considered an employee as she receives a T4 at the end of the year. She has a signed employment contract, and she has her employer direct her hours that she works. She takes care of her own musical instrument expenses for maintenance every year, so that's included in her signed agreement. And then she also pays out of pocket an additional $800 for any sheet music that she receives, or when she's going to write her own music. That's work related. She's reimbursed for a portion of it. She makes $20,000 a year from her employer, and we want to see how much she can actually deduct as an expense on her tax return. So for this example, we're going to calculate Marielle's expenses. So her expenses are the lesser of her $800 of sheet music, or $1,000, or 20% of her total income. So in this case, that would be $450. So the amount is the lesser of $800, lesser of $800, which is part A, or $550. So 1,000 less the 450. So in this calculation, Marielle would calculate that she's allowed to include her $550 of eligible expenses, her $450 that she's responsible to pay for to maintain her instrument, which would be a total of a $1,000 deduction on her tax return. So if you have questions relating to the example, all of this information can be found on CRA, or you can ask for assistance as well. The communication on CRA is a little bit more wordy than I would like it to be, for sure. But this hopefully will help you break it down just so you can understand the pieces and parts. Hi. All right, so once we have that example, we'll move on to another area which everyone is probably familiar with, home office expenses. Through COVID, everybody worked from home, everybody got the deduction, but they've changed that as of 2022. And so now you have to have your signed declaration of conditions of employment in order to claim the home office expenses. So the criteria in order for you to claim this is your employer required you to work from home. They required you to pay out of pocket for some of your expenses, if not all of your expenses, to have that workspace from home. The workspace at home is where majority of your work is completed. You meet with clients there, you host meetings there, and you do majority of your work there as well. And you would have to have that signed declaration of conditions of employment in order to claim it. You cannot claim your home office expenses more than what you're being paid out. So it cannot create a loss on your tax return, unfortunately. Usually it's based off of a percentage of your square footage of your office space compared to the square footage of the rest of your home as well. So we're gonna walk through an example together. So Cedric works remotely as a graphic designer for the company that's based out of Edmonton. He lives in Lethbridge though, and he conducts all of his work in his home space. Cedric has a dedicated office that represents 7% of the square footage of his home, and he has the following expenses. So he pays $1,000 in monthly rent, $285 in monthly utilities, and $100 in monthly internet expenses. So how much can Cedric claim as a home office expense? So we're gonna walk through the calculation to determine this. So we have our rent, we have our utilities, we have our internet. We're gonna times that by 12 to get the total expenses for the full year. This is a pretty generic thing. Usually CRA will want you to have copies of your invoice, copies of everything in order to be able to claim these amounts. So you don't need to send them in to CRA, you just have to be able to prove them if they come back and say, nah, I don't agree with that. So make sure you're keeping diligent records. That's one area that CRA might take a look at. So lastly, once we get to the total of home office expenses that we've experienced for the year, we're gonna times it by that home office percentage of the 7% to get our deduction that we can claim. And so these expenses are also going to be claimed on your T777 for your home office expenses deduction for your employment. Starts 6:30. You're good. We'll get her. I'll send her a text. Well, you missed some, you didn't miss it all. So we can talk after.
We'll be sending this whole thing up.
Yes. Yes. You won't be left in the weeds to figure it out by yourself. Don't worry. We're also going to take a look at self-employment. So usually the tax slips associated with this for artists would be your T4A. So that would not consider you to be an employee. You would just receive a lump sum payment for like a contract, and that would be included on a T4A. Other than that, there's not too many tax slips that you'll be responsible to get or will be responsible for receiving from someone else. It's mostly going to be your income, so anything that comes into your bank, comes out of your bank for expenses, and that's how you're going to track your income is what's the cash flow coming in, what's the cash flow going out, what's the total. So my recommendation would keep your expenses as pure and clean as possible. Do not muddle them with your personal expenses because it can get quite daunting to go through them at the end of the year. So if you want to set up like a separate bank account that those transactions are going through, that's another recommendation I would make. And then in order to fill out your taxes, the tax schedule you would use would be the 2125, and that's where the summary of your self-employment income will go. So you might be asking yourself, what can I deduct? What are some expenses? So it's pretty gray with the type of expenses that you can claim. Essentially, the expenses incurred have to be with the intention of earning a profit. So you can't just claim any expense. They have to be used with the intention of making a profit at the end of the day. Again, I reiterate, have adequate documentation. So keep all your receipts, keep all your invoices and bank statements, just keep everything as clean and as possible so it makes it a lot easier on yourself. I think I prepared a spreadsheet that you can take home, that you can use as a summary, because Excel is the blood of our life. Yes. Yes. So again, I reiterate, documentation, great. Make a date with yourself every single month and say, this is what happened for the whole month. I'm going to write it right down, take an hour, move on with your life. Forget about it until March. You're not going to do your taxes in April. Some other examples of business expenses that you can deduct, business insurance or licensing, any studio or workspace that you rent out, any supplies that are taken into consideration for making your work, any advertising costs. So if you have a website, what is the cost of running your website? Hopefully it's not very much. Professional fees. So if you decide, hey, I don't want to file my own tax return, and you want to come talk to me or one of my peers or anybody else, and you pay them, that is an allowable deduction. And then lastly, capital costs on assets. So capital costs on assets are usually a percentage of the cost of the total good. So if you bought a guitar, cost $2,500 over its useful life, which is a lot longer than I'm going to put in my example, like 10 years. Every single year, you're going to take a portion of the cost of the asset and record it as an expense on your tax return. So that's completely allowable. One thing to keep in mind, though, when you go down the line and you're like, I got to part with this guitar, you might have a capital gain on disposal. But something to keep in mind, so you might not want to record the capital cost allowance on that. Now we're going to go into some expenses that have some specific rules included. So the first one being meals and entertainment. So, for example, if you are having a beer tonight and you're having dinner after this, you came here with the intention to learn about your business, that is an allowable deduction. Granted, it's at 50%, so you can claim half of your meal, but every little bit helps when you're an artist, I think. So recommend keeping a calendar of all of your meetings with other people, having your receipt, writing down who you were with, because if CRA comes back and looks at that, they're going to say, well, that doesn't seem like a relevant expense. No, I was here. I was with the Allied Arts Council. I had dinner with them. We learned about my business. I think that's an allowable deduction. Home office, also an allowable deduction if you are self-employed. So there are, again, some rules. It's very similar if you're employed, an employed individual. This case, you do not have to have the signed 2200. You can just include your expenses that were incurred in your home office space, and it's going to be prorated as well. So it would be that percentage of your home office space over the square footage of your house. Another thing that I think people are unaware of is your cell phone expense. Within reason, you can claim cell phone expenses if you're having a lot of calls with clients and you're paying a high phone bill. Usually a rule of thumb would be guesstimate how much you're using your phone for work. So could be 50%, could be 80%, within reason, right? Some other expenses that you can deduct would be auto expenses. So a lot of people don't know that as well, but say you're traveling to Black Diamond to go do a concert. The expenses that you incurred for travel is an allowable deduction. So that would be based off of the kilometers driven. CRA has a prescribed rate of, I think it's 70 cents for the first 5,000 kilometers, and it changes every year to inflation rates and stuff like that. But that's also something that I would consider: tracking your mileage, having a business log. Also, other expenses that you can deduct for your vehicle would be a portion for registration, insurance, maintenance costs, anything like that. So it is highly recommended that you keep a logbook, and that's not just for your business travel, but it's all of the travel of your vehicle, and then pick out the pieces that are business. Have I seen CRA come back and ask for this? No, but I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. Have your business kilometers tracked. Keep your records as clean as possible, because that's going to save you a lot of headache in the future. Okay. This is what the self-employment schedule looks like. So I put this in here just so you can kind of see the types of expenses that are included on the schedule. So if something hits for you and you're like, actually, I do pay that every year, maybe I should be recording that as an allowable expense for myself. So say, for example, I pay for my printer every year. I'm going to include that as a deduction. I pay for paper to fill my printer. That's going to be an allowable deduction. I have these special type of pens that I like to use. That's going to be an allowable deduction because you're using it for work business purposes, right? Yes. Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk to you about for self-employment income. It gets obviously more obscure than that, and there's a lot of like personal and individual questions that you have to ask yourself as you go through it as well. The next section I wanted to talk to you about is whether or not you should incorporate your business. Very important question to ask yourself. And then my answer would be, it depends. It depends on your circumstance. It depends where you're at. It depends on a couple different factors. Do you have liability insurance? Do you have things that you want to protect that are in your personal name, like your house if something goes wrong, or other investments that you have in your personal name and it would make sense for you to incorporate to protect your assets? That's a question that you should ask yourself. Another question would be, what are your financial goals? What do you want it to look like? What do you need your income level to be? And how much money do you need to live off each year? So that's another consideration. I did include a calculation for you in the next slide. This would kind of be my first look to see whether it would make sense for me to incorporate. So I'm going to take my total income minus my expenses that we've talked about on our T2125. So all of those expenses incurred. We're going to take out what we need to live off of, so our personal needs, whether we need to pay for our rent, our mortgage payment, any food, personal needs. Then we're going to take out our personal savings goals and to see where we're at. Then we're going to take out any debt obligations that you have, and then figure out the remaining income that's left over. If this is a zero, we probably do not want to incorporate at this time. It doesn't make sense for you to spend more money with the incorporation costs from the lawyer. That costs money. It also costs money to have like a different year-end prepared every year. So you wouldn't be preparing just one tax return. You'd also be preparing two. So one for your business and then one for yourself. So you just have to ask yourself and weigh the pros and cons as to whether or not it makes sense for you to spend that additional income on doing that. And then what are your goals at the end of the day? Do you want to keep like a nest egg for yourself in the corporation where you're paying lower tax rates at a 12% instead of 30%? And then, can you live on less than you make, essentially? And do you want to build that as your retirement income when you're not doing art full time? Things to consider. I know it's a heavy slide, and when I deal with business clients a lot of the time, they get to this point and they're like, I'm not ready. So it's a big step and definitely something that should be considered very carefully. Next, we're going to do an example of self-employment income. So this one's quite involved. I'll go through it quite quickly, but it might be something that you want to do at home too, as like, yeah, because you want to do math at home. Stupid. Duh. Yes, you do. It is really fun. You can plug your own numbers in and see what it turns out to be. So we're going to look at Sandy's taxable income in this example. I'm just going to take a glass of water. All right. So Sandy's a painter, performs mostly contract work, and she sells, or he or she sells individual pieces online and at local markets. Sandy owns a vehicle that they drive to meet potential clients and has a dedicated workspace that they rent. So we're looking at Sandy's income for the year. So Sandy earned $15,000 from a project with the city and received a T4A slip in March of this year. They also sold 20 pieces of work during the year and earned $10,000 of income. Sandy also has a part-time job at an art gallery where they earned $25,000 and was issued a T4. Sandy incurred expenses also. So $1,500 in supplies were purchased and $1,000 were purchased in the prior year as well. $3,000 were spent on home expenses. They also paid studio rent of $500. They had $2,000 in vehicle repairs, yuck, awful. $3,000 in fuel, even worse. And they paid $1,000 in vehicle insurance. The total kilometers driven for business was 6,000 kilometers, and they drove 10,000 kilometers in total. So these are like examples of things that I do every day, is just this calculation. Aren't you having fun as an accountant yet? I promise, it's great. So cheat sheet, I gave you the answer. We can plug in, this is very similar to the document that I provided Steve. So you can use this for your own numbers in there as well. I know it could be a little bit harder to see in here, but I'm just gonna look into my cheat sheet. So we have Sandy's income from her T4 of $15,000. The income from sales and services, so this would be all the artwork that she sold at the market. So overall, total income was $25,000. So now we can put in those expenses. So there was $6,000, I think, in rent. So she paid $500 a month in the rental space. And then she also paid $1,500 in supplies, giving total deductions of $7,500. But wait, there's more. There was vehicle expenses. So we have all the vehicle expenses listed here: fuel, repairs and maintenance, car insurance. So we have to break that out into the portion that's allowable. So in this case, 60% of the vehicle expenses were work-related. So 60% of her expenses can be used as an allowable deduction on her tax return. In this case, $3,600. So this brought income down for Sandy to $13,900. So a lot better than $25,000 because they tracked their expenses. We like that. I keep wanting to ask if there's questions. I'm like, let's get into it. There's no T4. So for your T4, this would be prepared on a separate schedule, or this would be in a separate schedule. So overall, this isn't the total income. There would have been like expenses that she could have probably deducted from there, but that would be taxed and have CPP taken off of it and EI taken off of it. So when we take a look at it, when I'm preparing a tax return, it looks a little bit different. So I wish I brought my computer. I'd hook it up and we can work it to the end. But that's where we're at for self-employment income. We want to keep it as clean and as pure as possible, so it's easy to determine those final numbers, right? So now that we know all of our self-employment and our employment expenses and our employment income, we're going to look at some important dates. So, I wish you wouldn't put it up there. I was going to ask if anyone knows when the deadline is. It is April 30th, except it is not April 30th if you are self-employed. So I do not recommend putting your taxes off filing until June 15th, but as the world goes, sometimes your taxes just don't get done until June 15th, and that is the filing deadline if you're self-employed. One thing to consider though is, yes, you can file later on, but if you have any taxes payable, that amount is still due on April 30th. So the CRA would like you to pay them on time. If you don't meet that deadline, there will be penalties, sadly. So it's 5% of the balance plus 1% of the balance for every late month to a maximum of 12 months. Okay, then there's also the failure to report income penalty if you do miss some of your income slips. And then there's also a penalty for false statements as well. So if you file them incorrectly and you didn't clean records, there is that risk that CRA will come back and say, I don't agree with this. And then if you don't have the supporting documents, they could send you another penalty as well. So like I said, lastly, the payment deadline, April 30th. Get your taxes done as soon as possible. Avoid all of the sadness. And then that includes also non-resident returns. So if you're an American doing some work here, you also have the deadline of April 30th as well. Okay, my last slide, we went through these very quick. I talk very fast. You're welcome. Everybody loves to talk about taxes. GST registration. So, does it make sense for you to be GST registration, a GST registrant? You are required to be a GST registrant if you earn over $30,000 in income in the year. You must charge GST on your sales, and you must remit GST. But you can also deduct the amount that's claimed against any of your GST that you paid on your own expenses as well. For example, say you bought or you sold a print for $250. You're like, please let that be it. $250. You would charge your price of the $250 plus the 5% of GST in Alberta. But then any supplies that you bought, like paints or anything, and you paid GST on that, you would take the GST collected minus, we call them ITCs, so that's GST that you paid on something else, to get your final amount that's owing. GST returns for self-employed individuals are due June 15th, so very much the same as if you're self-employed. That's your deadline. But if you have any questions on this, I did include the link to CRA. That's the source for most of this information. I don't work for the CRA. Most accountants do not work for the CRA. We want you to have a business that makes the most sense for you. So if you do have any questions, find a trusted advisor that you reach out to for advice. And yeah, there's lots of nuances when it comes to being an artist, I think, and I think you should give yourself a lot of credit for showing up today and expanding your knowledge into this, so definitely a good thing. Question time.
First off, let's give a real nice round of applause for Steph Hogan. Wonderful presentation. So we do have one question already in from online. Carly Barris is asking, how many years are you required to keep proof documents / receipts after filing?
Right. The general rule of thumb is 7 years. So definitely 7. That's kind of the statute bar amount. So if you have anything after that, you can probably shred it. Or if you're like me and you have things from like when you were a teenager, that's not a bad thing too. there's no risk for them to come after me for that though. So it just depends. Yeah.
I have a quick question on GST.
Okay.
So say you had a really good year and you crossed that $30,000 threshold. Are you there for after entitled that you have to consistently afterwards?
Yes. Once you're in, you're in.
Once they get you, they got you.
Yes. So the other side to that as well, say you had one really amazing year, and then the next year you were maybe at a loss and you paid more in supplies than you made, and you can claim a refund on GST. So sometimes it evens out, but remember that GST is not part of your income. It's just a filing requirement.
Right.
So you have your cost, and then you have your GST that you claim on it, or that you're claiming on it. So they are separate things. It shouldn't cut into your revenue. Definitely set it aside once you collect it. It'll save you a lot of headache at the end of the year when you have maybe like a $2,500 GST bill that you have to pay.
Right.
So definitely set it aside always.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I recall, it's not like an annual thing as much as it's a rolling quarter thing. So I know somebody who had their business sort of took off within a year, and they got a little bit surprised by the need to have collected and remitted GST because they reached that $30,000 mark at a weird moment because it was cumulative over the last 4 quarters and not just within a calendar year. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I can a little bit. So when you're getting close to that 30K mark, definitely take a look into it, because you don't want to wait till the end of the year and you're like, oh my goodness, I crossed that in Q1 and now I have to file backwards and I didn't register and I can only go back 30 days to register. Definitely just be cognizant of it, take a look at it. I am no GST expert. I can give advice on that, but you know where you're at usually with your sales, hopefully.
Yeah.
I know I've been there. Yes. I'm giving you lots of credit because you deserve it. But definitely just be cognizant of it.
So if it feels like it's going well, maybe start just putting some money aside, and if that's savings for you later, great. And if you
Yes.
end up owing it as GST, you'll be good to go.
But I mean, live your life. So,
Amen.
yes. Like, the one thing is when you're getting close to that point, you'll have to be GST registered, and then you would have to start collecting on your sales. So just be cognizant of when you're feeling like you're close. Because I would hate for that to happen later on in the year, and you're like, oh no, I forgot to do that a little while ago. So,
So for instance, like if somebody had maybe a couple of, or a few large-scale mural projects, right, where they're getting paid $10,000, $15,000, and you got like a couple of those in the year, and then all of a sudden you've crossed that threshold, so you have to be considering, oh, I'm going to be in that GST category now, right?
yeah, and I think because you know that well in advance, hopefully if you are working on a large-scale contract and you're saying, I'm going to be paid $30,000 over 3 quarters,
Right.
I would probably want to get registered right away so I can put that in my contract. And then when I'm starting to buy supplies for it, I'm making sure that I capture those ITCs that I've paid on my supplies to mitigate the amount that I owe at the end of the year.
And similar to that, like suppose you got a large grant, and that would basically still counts as your income, correct?
Yep.
So that would sort of might trigger you into that GST. So something to consider. Or if you're selling, Bailey has really great T-shirts, right? So maybe 30. Well, but not just that, right? So it's like, say you're doing a bunch of shows where you're getting $2,000 a show, like, right, or something like that. A few of those on top of your merch sales and other things, and now all of a sudden it's when you put it in a number form like that, it seems pretty far away.
It seems far away, but you get there pretty quick.
You could get there pretty quick in a year
Yeah.
if you so just something to be mindful of, I think.
Yeah, And I think just having that exercise with yourself of once a month, I'm going to take a look and what are my ins and what are my outs. The $30,000 is the gross amount. So whether or not it feels like you're at $30,000 in your bank, it is going to be mitigated by all those expenses that you're incurring. So look at the top line first, and then that's going to help educate your decision.
So moral of the story is records. Like,
I mean, just have those meetings with yourself.
Yeah.
And if you want to, like, or with others, like get a buddy, look at it together, buy yourself a coffee, you know, it's 50% deductible. If you want to like trick yourself into having a treat with it, sometimes I do that with work. I'm like, I'm going to have a glass of wine while I sit here because I know I'm going to have to do this. So create a really good safe space for yourself to have those like hard conversations with your money. And I know it's like a lot easier said than done. I'm still getting in the practice of doing this myself. And I'm an employed individual. I don't have to worry about the self-employment expense. It's daunting to do that, but I think starting early, getting on track, and having those conversations with yourself is very valuable.
If you have expenses during the day, do you have a daily routine where you stop at the end of the day or maybe even the morning and sort of summarize previous day or something? What was happening money-wise?
I don't have a daily routine because I think that would be too much for my brain. I'm like a revisit monthly expense kind of gal, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna do better next month because I won't buy so many coffees or beers. So in the moment, I feel like that can maybe get strenuous and like you have very limited time during the day. So, I mean, whatever works for you as an individual, I don't think it could work for me. I'm like a monthly treat myself and sit down kind of a gal. On a daily. Yeah. Oh, I know. Yeah, you're like, what did I do? Yeah. So, I mean, if you could use your calendar app as a really good tool and maybe even do like on the daily, just be like, I spent this much, put it in there, and then you can revisit it later. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I share a couple of things that I've
Please.
done on this? So one of them, for a while, I had an app where when I recorded, I took a photo of my receipts. So when I got back into the car from buying something, I would take a photo of it. And more than that, because sometimes things, as much as we want to keep it clean, sometimes things do get a little muddy.
Yeah.
Just like have a pen and select the, like circle the thing that is for work and just write a little note on it. Same as when you have a beer or whatever, write on your receipt and take a picture of it, because receipts also fade. They don't last 7 years.
Yes. And they
actually
blow
don't.
away in the wind.
Yeah. Some of them do. You'd be surprised at how long they last when you go back to file 7 years of taxes. But yeah, those were a couple things that have helped me.
Yeah, definitely.
Even if you could just go back to it later. And another thing is, I go to a art club once a week, and it is the best thing ever. It's very low commitment, but very fun. Some people come every once in a while. I want to do the same thing for this. So for your finances, it sucks thinking about the money you spent and the money you made, and you don't want to do it till later. But if you go to with a bunch of other people like this and hang out and complain and celebrate together,
Yes.
you can make some notes together, and we've got some really great people there. And so if any... Exactly, then you can deduct everything. So I actually want to put it out there, if anybody is interested in taking part in this, to reach out to me. My name is Katie Wild. You can find me on Instagram, Katie Wild Art. And yeah, if you just reach out to Steve, he can connect you with me as well.
Yeah, amazing.
Please join a financial club with us.
Yes, I love a plug. That is fantastic. This isn't... Yeah. It's a beer after work every day. Yeah. Within reason, yeah.
Do we have any other questions from the room? Eric?
Steve mentioned merch and talking about some of your example artists were making paintings, and you're thinking about the materials that the expenses were. When, how does an artist figure into cost of goods sold
Like you-
calculations?
Like
Is
you
that
as a person claiming
like self-employed?
your
I'm
work?
thinking, yeah.
Like
yeah.
your time and your
the things that
hours?
I'm selling. Well,
Or-
even the materials or printing costs, or
Oh,
are those things that
please.
like T-shirts and
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely a supply to get you there. So definitely claim that as an expense because that's what's incurred to get to your medium.
right? But
Yeah.
there's a different calculation for cost of
No.
goods. No.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just those get filed.
It's like a different.
So
Yeah.
from like a business standpoint, like a normal business standpoint,
Right.
where it's your cost of goods sold, it would just
right.
be your supplies towards your.
And
Yes.
is that right?
Yes.
Is what Steve said, right?
That it's 100% deductible because that's
Oh,
the
okay.
cost that's going into the final product.
That's not a calculation for us
Nope,
or anything.
nope, 100%.
Perfect. Good.
100%. Yep.
Hi, you're doing great.
Hi, Dan. Thanks.
I guess my question, going back to the travel log, just because that's
Yes.
something I started this year.
Yeah, because you're
Um,
out of town a lot.
I
Absolutely.
am a lot.
Yeah.
And it's kind of scary starting to track it and being like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh. You mentioned like tracking like stuff that you do personally, and I'm currently not doing that, but I have my like beginning of year odometer. And then I figured if I have all of my work kilometers, then
You
I
can
have my
probably do a
end of year.
calculation, yeah.
Yeah.
But the way CRA wants it
Ah,
is they want you to track it all and
mm,
say exactly where you were. So better to err on the side of caution.
yeah.
But if you've started it this way, usually it'll make sense to
Yeah.
them at the end.
Yeah.
Like you don't need to put in, like I was driving to go get groceries.
Right.
So I think if you have all of your business kilometers in there, and then you have your total calculation, I think
Mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess for myself, I'm not entirely sure. Like some things I just side on caution, and so I don't know if it's an actual like business travel thing, which is maybe my indicator that maybe it isn't. But I guess like just getting more clarity on that stuff.
Do you have an example that you would like to share with the class?
Oh, maybe if we come back to me, but
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't work for CRA. I do not work for them.
Is there any questions from the online group? Do you have another one? Okay, Daniel's got another one.
Perfect.
And then I forget it right away. Yes. So if we were to incur professional fees of coming to an accountant
Right.
and having your help getting that done, I'm curious. I've read a couple different things about like how to organize our receipts for our own sanity and not just yours, but also so that potentially it is quicker for you and cheaper for us.
Yes.
So like some things are just like by month, other things are like keep all your fuel for the year together and all of your supplies together for the year as opposed to month by month. And I'm just curious, or does it depend on the accountant?
It depends on, I think, the individual. So it would depend on what keeps your brain as happy as possible. I'll give you some examples of how I've received records, and maybe that'll add some clarity into the question. So some of the mediums that I receive records from clients, I have some clients that put all of their expenses for the whole year in a single white envelope. They close it up. They write the total that they've added together on the outside. If I have questions on it, sometimes I'll dig into it and look and see what it is. But for the most part, I just take the total that's on the top and say, that seems reasonable. Yeah. I've also received like garbage bags full of receipts and said, please organize. So, I mean, that is going to be more time sensitive. Most accountants bill on the hours spent. So if you are completely just like, I don't know what I want to do and that's not my area of focus, I just would like you to take all of my invoices and summarize them for me and figure them out. That is totally on you if you want to pay the money to have someone go through and organize it. If you want to have a weekly meeting of the club and figure everything out on a monthly or weekly basis and just have your Excel spreadsheet and then summarize it at the end, chef kiss, we love that. Another medium that might be useful if you are having quite a bit of transactions, or if there's even areas where you're billing a lot, maybe consider going on to like QuickBooks Online. Might be a good avenue to go through, because then you can do the billings and scan the receipts and have everything on your app on your phone. That is also an area that I've had clients keep track of all of their ins and outs, and then you can do bank reconciliations on there as well.
So are there a number of banking
Like apps? Yep. Yep. I know there's some free ones, like Wave is a free one. Yeah. It's
There's also Dext as well.
Dext is good for keeping receipts. I don't know if I would use it for just for record keeping, like or online filing system. I've had a lot of people really love QuickBooks Online, but there's also like other apps. Soho?
What was that?
Zoho. I haven't heard of that one. Oh, amazing. Yeah, I love that. But I mean,
ZOHO.
I don't know if it's like I don't use it as much as I should, so I don't know if I take my recommendation with a grain of salt for how much I do enjoy it.
Maybe ask you after
the club
after
meeting.
April 30th.
yeah. Yes. Yes.
But yeah, it has sort of.
Yeah, that's awesome. I personally am just like an Excel fan. So every single month when I have my little sit down with my glass of wine and myself, I'll go through my little budget that I've prepared on Excel and do my like actuals versus my budget. I am not an expert. I'm just retraining my brain to get better at it. So I'm in the struggle town too. Yes. Yes. We're all in this together. Don't worry. But yeah. So Excel's always great.
Another question? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's get Bailey.
I have a few questions. I don't know if I should do them all in a row, but the first one is about supporting documents, like if you actually need the receipt or if you can go through bank statements. Like if there's one more official, obviously one is more official, but is the other one okay?
The other one is okay for yourself. If CRA comes back and they're like, give me the 10 highest receipts or invoices that you spent on supplies, they'll want the physical receipts, and bank statements are not good enough. So for like your working pieces, so if you want to go through every single month and categorize things, or at the end of the year you want to like do your summaries, going from the bank statement's great. However, keep all your receipts in like a picture on your phone in a folder, or have, like I said, like the white envelopes, and just say like, this is what I have, a picture of it, but I'm just keeping it here just in case.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then what was your other?
Another question is for like self-employment, like if there's like different areas of self-employment, do they have to be like the expenses recorded separately for each thing? Like if someone was like teaching guitar lessons and also like a musician in a band,
Touring and things.
do they
yeah.
record them separately or can they go together?
It depends, because they're in those two examples, they're fairly similar to a certain extent. So like you're using your musical talents in order with the intention of earning a profit.
Mhm.
It's a very good question.
I think about it every year.
You think about it every year. In my opinion, I would probably report it all on one schedule. But if it makes sense and you're claiming different types of expenses, so say like for guitar lessons, you'd want to have your home office expenses included in there, and you're not necessarily, like say you have a separate jam space that you're renting out and things like that, that's when I would do the divide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. It just depends on the types of expenses that you're incurring and whether it makes sense. to separate those. Yeah.
Okay. And then final question, in like self-employment, it like asks you if there are like partners or like people that you're paying maybe or working with. Can you like describe how that would work within a band?
Within a band.
Within a band where like the finances are running through one person but are split equally,
Right.
like not hired employees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would have one schedule for yourself. Like, so you're going to be obviously filing separately unless they're like your partner or something and you're filing together. You would have your one schedule that you would record at 100%. And then you would go down and usually at the bottom, like I know in our program that we use, you can have your partnership allocation. So it would be like 10% or something like that if there was 5 of you. No, if there's 10 of you in a band, you'd be 10%. You could do it that way, or what you could do is you could have your separate summary. So say you have like your Excel summary, and you say, this is our summary for all of the income for the band for the year. These are all of the expenses that we've incurred. And say you had something that you paid for just for yourself, and you're like, I don't want anybody else to get that deduction because I was the one footing the bill for that. Keep that separate, and then do your summary, do your allocation, put your allocation amounts on your tax return, and then include that one expense that you paid for out 100%. So does that make sense? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess what I'm thinking about is like if like the band got paid $100, say, and you split it between 5 people, you had like $100 come into your bank account,
And then you had to transfer everybody
but then
out?
you transferred it out. So
Yes.
do you like claim the whole 100 and then that you like paid like had these expenses, or that you just had your amount that you kept?
You could just record the amount that you kept.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
On that,
Again,
would it
gray
be
matter. Yeah.
would you want to be logging like those disbursements as well though too? Like so
You
s-
could.
You could. What like do you think it's worthwhile to do that, or is it?
It depends how many there are. So say you had like one gig every single week. So you had like 52 gigs that you needed to break out. That sounds like a lot of laborious work. I would probably just take the amount that I kept and said, that is my top line. And then I'm going to include my expenses. And whether or not you need to split that between however many of you are in the band or whatever, then you can do that after. But again, you just have to keep it as simple for yourself as possible. Yeah. And that's when I would work off of a bank statement. Yeah. Yeah, so you can see the transfers on there, and that would be valid support for that.
Going back to the mileage thing.
Yes.
That's cool.
Of course.
So, like, I'll travel up to Calgary for
Mm-hmm.
work, and then I'm fortunate enough to like stay with folks, and then I have a regular rehearsal space that I'll go to.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm going there for like 2 months back and forth, but I'm in a different city than I live. Can I record all of those kilometers as business kilometers? Because it's a lot at the end of the day when I'm tracking it, and I'm like, it's honestly the majority of me using my car at that point.
Yeah, and that puts a lot of wear and tear on your vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to go there for work because
Yeah.
you live in Lethbridge. There's not a lot of acting gigs here.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it would
Yeah.
make sense to claim it unless like when you're at like a family's house and then you're just traveling to get groceries and things like that and like going for dinner with friends.
Mm.
I wouldn't necessarily consider that to be a business expense,
Yeah.
but I would say like going to your rehearsal space
Yeah,
from
okay.
your place that you're staying
Yeah.
would make sense to claim.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if there was another example, but that sounds good. That's like the main one, I think, for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Any
There's-
other questions?
There's always time. Let's go.
Okay, so sort of similar to when you register for GST, it's kind of like a one-way street, right? Like once you've registered, then you're obligated to continue paying, correct?
You can
Or collecting.
deregister.
Okay, but that's a whole process.
It's a process.
Okay.
If you're not earning any income and you just need to file a nil return, that's fine too. It's
Okay.
so easy to do. All you'd have to do is Google like GST filing online. You get in the mail, or I think they're not doing paper mail anymore. Awful. But you'll have like a code that you can log into. You'll have your GST number. You would log into that, use your code, and then you could just file a blank return.
Right.
So.
But like if you do make it an income, even if it's minimal, you would still be obligated
Yes.
to charge GST on that.
Yes, it'd be
So-
like filing a personal tax return every year. Yeah.
Yeah, is it sort of similar when it comes to self-employment? This was something that I sort of encountered when transitioning from my primary income being regular employment
Yeah.
to self-employment. You know how when we're saying we have to like, it's a good idea to start like tracking things, even if you're not going to get a return from it yet, like start tracking those things that you're going to be claiming. I had done something like that with the self-employment side of my work,
Yep.
even though it wasn't significant compared to my regular employment. But then when I was laid off, it affected my EI because I had put self-employed down on taxes. They came back with the EI and said, well, you're self-employed. You're not eligible for EI. And I'm like, okay, but that was just an exercise. I didn't actually make good money on that yet. That wasn't a sustainable thing. So I definitely regretted like calling myself self-employed until I reached a certain level with it. So when you're recording self-employment income alongside regular employment income, should
run
you
the
just be
risk.
recording it in the other income line, or how does that work?
I mean, it is kind of gray. In that situation, I would ask the question, was your intent at the beginning, was that to turn a profit? Or was it just investing into supplies at that point?
I mean, yeah, I think the point was to turn a small profit with the hope
Right.
of growing that to a sustainable point. But was it something that would cover me in an unemployment situation? Absolutely nowhere near that.
Yeah.
I was just trying to like get in the habit,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, was it to a profit? Yeah, sure. But in the hundreds of dollars is, you know.
Yeah, you have to, again, weigh the pros and cons. If it was like $500 income and you didn't have enough expenses to cover off that top line, would it make more sense to just put it on other income instead
Yeah.
of a separate schedule? 100%, yeah.
Okay, because that's kind of what I ended up going towards afterwards, just
Yeah.
for a safety net kind of
Yeah.
scenario. I just had another question about the GST versus like ITCs tracking. Is that very much like a project by project basis where you do want to keep the like taxes? You're keeping your receipts specifically, not just to claim, not just based on what's eligible for your tax deductions,
Yeah.
but particularly to get your return from your GST.
Yes.
So even if it's not an eligible expense necessarily for the one thing, if it has to do with that project, then you want to track it by project.
Well, I think overall, like your business income won't be specific to just one project if you're doing the same medium in like the world for the year. So say you're doing like a big project, but you're also doing t-shirts on the side. That I think would all go under one business schedule. So I think
Anything you paid taxes on that was a expense for your
art
business at
or-
all.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I would keep them all under one.
Okay, so it
One
doesn't need to be
schedule.
broken out.
No.
Okay, that's
No.
great.
I
news.
think that sounds like a logistical nightmare
Well,
for you.
that's
I
what
wouldn't
I
want to do
thought.
that. I do not recommend you do that. Yes.
And just the other thing I wanted to say while I have the microphone in my hand is that liability insurance is a boon to you if you want to do public art projects, especially ones that have to do with street closures or using scaffolding or anything like that. If you are applying for projects that are put out by cities, even if it's not like in the sort of like procurement bidding section, having liability insurance can be really, really helpful for you. So I don't really know how onerous that is. I don't personally have it myself, my projects have not required that as an artist, but as an administrator, I know that those can be really helpful. So I don't know if you can speak to liability insurance anymore, but even if not, just putting that out there for artists.
I can't speak to it because I'm not an insurance sales, something like that. But I know, like, through the SAG, we've had like there's not a lot of places that cover certain art areas. So definitely do your research on what would make the most sense for coverage, I think, wise. But again, allowable deduction if you are paying for that. So.
And the liability insurance, that is deductible?
Yes,
Or-
100%.
yes. And so I can speak to this only because this year, the AP program at CASA, we've clarified
Oh, good.
our
Yay.
liability insurance situations. And there's a broker, I don't know, whatever, the people who do the insurance thing,
Yes,
liability
broker.
related to the city. So it's the one that the city uses. They can let you do very compartmentalized liability insurance, whereas I can now do that for live gigs where I'm drawing in public or work teaching, maybe only a 3-day workshop or something like that. And it's very easy to fill out. I can speak to that. And it's surprisingly affordable. I was expecting I was worried. And
Oh,
it's
good.
because you can get into such specificity. And when people think of liability insurance, often the thing that's super scary is when it gets into food and serving drink and things like that, which I never
Definitely.
have to worry about. And as soon as you check off all that stuff, it just drops like a rock, the expense wise. And so
That's good.
I should probably even be thinking about it for school visits and things because it's that easy to set up. Yeah. I would reach out to folks at Allied Arts Council. That's who shared it with me. I can't remember it offhand. And Courtney at CASA is the one who is divvying out that information. But I found it's all
good.
online. It's super easy to do and tremendous peace of mind. I can speak to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we all need collectively to get a lot better at that part.
Well, and it's information sharing, and I think that's one thing that even this session and the Allied Arts Council, like what they're doing with all of their informational sessions, is so valuable to all of us. So, yeah, thanks, Steve. You're doing a great job.
Thanks. Any other questions? That's actually a perfect segue. Once again, let's give a nice round of applause. Snaps from the online people for Steph Hogan. I'm going to mic it here. So thanks everyone for attending in person and online. We will be doing another one of these, obviously every month. Next month, actually, April 2nd, we're going to be back here at Sisters. The next presentation, actually Katie Wild is going to be involved, and it's all about vinyl art wraps. So you see those vinyl art wraps that are around the city, a bunch of them on 13th Street, North and South. How do those come to be, right? So the idea of, from the idea standpoint, all the way through the design aspect, right into installation, we're gonna kind of demystify that whole process for you. So that session will be coming up April 2nd. I'll be sending out a link to that, as well as Steph's workbook that she's got created. Super handy for filing your taxes and organizing all that stuff when you're ready to do that. Yeah, without any further ado, I'd say thank you. Thanks for coming. You did great, Steph.
I think for myself, it's like a consistency thing, like coming back to it, or at least that's what I'm learning. So it's just like, even just, like there's stuff in there that we talked about that I may have heard before,